Now, the reason that we put 9, 10, and 11 together, as you can see, just by taking a look at 9, that it's brief. And so let me adjust my eyes here. These pages, as you know, as we go into this last part of the letter, is based on taking care of the people left behind in Jerusalem. They might even think of Antioch, but Antioch is a self-sustaining place, and most of the people there are Gentiles. There are some Jewish Gentiles because of the fact people have fled down south and they've come up north. You know, there's always constant hubbub there. Other people have stayed in Jerusalem, and in doing so, they are led to be, for some, kind of heretics. Heretics meaning that they have denounced 1800 years of Jewish experience, going all the way back to Abraham and the great ones, Moses and David, and then the major prophets, Elijah, Elisha, then the 3 famous ones, Isaiah and Ezekiel and Zechariah, and I should say Jeremiah as well. I put in Zechariah there because he's the one who talks about the 30 pieces of silver. And so from that point on, excuse me, there don't seem to be a lot of prophetic material. And so we end up with being right before the time of Christ, about the year 200 or so. And there you get things like the Book of Wisdom was written between 180 and 200. And you get a few other things in there at that time. And so really the letters start, as we have, with the Acts of the Apostles. And the Acts of the Apostles is in itself an entity written by Luke. And then from that, we get the apostles and what they did. And we covered that a year ago. And what they did was bring the message of Christ to the Mediterranean. They would continue to do so, by the way, all the way up to the 400s plus. And at that time, the strangest thing happened. There's a plethora of pagan rituals all over the place. So some people are thinking that this Catholicism, Christianity, is just another one of those places, because the Romans have their gods, which are stones. And you go to the stone that you have in your house, or you go to the statue of Demeter, or also known as Diana, or you can go to other stones there. The greatest one was the one of Zeus. And guess what? These things have all been destroyed, have they not? And you're gonna say yes. This is every generation, because those things were the 7 wonders of the ancient world: the great Alexandria library, the Colossus at Rhodes, the burial place of the Manasseh, and the hanging gardens there of Babylon and things. And so all those were destroyed by earthquakes. And the statue of Zeus would be monstrous. It'd be maybe 15 stories tall at least. It's one of the biggest things they ever had there. And it was mainly a piece of stone that was cut out of a forest of a hill. And so from that, they could go behind it and make this great statue and then build a place around it. So what's happening here is that Paul now has given his message in his first letter. He's given his kind of soothing attitude in the second letter. He doesn't go among them as much, but he sends his representatives there. And then what he does is he takes on this task. And as was noted in our last session, we actually had from Titus and his other friend to go through all of these places and to take up a collection. And so the point of doing that was that to take something to our brothers. As I mentioned, we even in our parish, through the generosity of people, came forward and said, what can we do to help the people in Syria and in Turkey who are not Catholics, Christians, maybe even against us? That doesn't matter. They're people in hurt. they had just in the papers the other day, something like 300 young, I mentioned this, before, babies and young kids. Some kids there don't even know the names of their parents. And they'll forevermore, their parents might be dead or parents might be looking for them. It's just a mayhem. And all this is going on just because of these monstrous earthquakes. When you get those platelets, you can't cure them. You can't put a nail down through them and say, okay, stay where you are. California has the same routine. They have a great big huge kind of a split in all the way down, and these platelets are there for these tremulous things. And so what's going on is the Paul's note to say to others, love is itself a gift. He is not going to then say, well, I'll relax while you people go about doing all, all the business of raising the money. He says, no, in fact, he says, I'll take it there myself, which means a long journey again. Of course, he's used to that. And to go down and to get to the people down there. Part of the problem is that if he goes down there, that he is considered by some a heretic, and if he dares to walk into the temple area, he could be accosted. And then what would be even worse is if one of the Gentile Christians came with him and went into the temple area, would be a magnanimous or a violation and could bring death. And that's what they want. But they can't bring about Paul's death. He goes down they take him down to Festus, and he tells Festus, I am a Roman citizen. And so that takes care of that. And we don't get much in the Acts of the Apostles as to the death of Paul, but we do get to his routine in the area of Rome. So let's start. It says God's indescribable gift. Why would it be indescribable? Well, maybe because of the fact we don't know how much they got, who got it. Doesn't matter. It's got it for somebody. So it says now about the service to the holy ones. Yeah, and we mentioned this last week. This is one of the beautiful things that we get is these kind of admirations. Paul doesn't say, and you slovenly rats who had all those misunderstandings in the beginning and we had to straighten them out and stuff. No, he says, now you holy ones. So I'm going to repeat again. And I'm looking into this. I have 24 half-hour lectures on the pagans. You say, wow, they had that many? Well, no, this is just a description of in discs that go half an hour each. So you'd be happy to know that, aren't you? That I'm spending all that time with I don't light a candle or anything, but they're talking about all this. And a lot of it goes back to Zoroastrianism. In other words, there are branches right there that just break off. Well, let's not take solace in this. If you added up all of the breakaways from the Catholic Church and then from the church who broke from the church who broke from the church, there are approximately 20,000 different denominations of Christianity. And you could actually go, if you go where I lived for a long time in this poor area of Woodlawn, you could just go up 63rd Street there and you could find on each block maybe 2 or 3 churches, which means doorstop churches, like abandoned clothing stores or other type things. And people go there for Sunday worship and it would have a clientele of maybe 30 people or so. Others, like if you go further south down Cottage Grove, they had one there where they had about 10,000 members, all recorded, all on paper, all donating, and most of them coming to these large assemblies they had. In Woodlawn, they had one right behind us at Mount Carmel High School, one of these things of the Apostles Church. And the man who did that was high in politics, but he was also a great preacher. But if you take a look at the audience, if you want to call it that, it was largely middle age to older age and female. So, the punch of that neighborhood was a gang that had 5,000 members, male, the Blackstone Rangers. We lived on Dante, then there was another street, then there was Blackstone. And so we had to, kind of say hello to them. What? Yes.
I thought Zoroastrianism predated Christianity.
Oh, that's we're saying yes, exactly that. Zoroastrianism brought about was the birth of all these other things that go on. So, but you're right. That seems to be like the stem, of many of these things that they just are breakaway. So, I'll find out more when when I get through this. I've only done two lectures, and this gentleman is a renowned scholar, but he's going to try. I think his attempt just for his effort so far is to show you that Christianity was treated by some as just another one of these sects. So therefore, we would be thinking of this beauty of the being with Christ as, the glory of everything. And at the same time, other people are saying, no, they're not. They're just one of them. Even the Romans said, oh yeah, that's just a sect of the Jews. Remember that back in Corinth when Paul gets up in front of the consulate there, whatever they want to call him, and he says, I don't want to get involved in your religious kind of things, So I'm not going to get involved in the different branches of Judaism. You did not want, though, just to back up on what you said, if you did not want to, like in the 280s or the 303s time zones, you do not want to say, I'm against the emperor who is God. So that would be maybe the last thing you say. But that's why, isn't that why some of the Christians are killed in the early rate, that they were not worshiping God. We even had that go all the way back to Daniel, and that was 500 before Christ. They wouldn't accept the emperor at that time as the God. And remember his famous dream. He had 4 levels of metallic origin, it went right down the list of the book, steel, copper, or whatever it is down there. And he gets to, and so the statue is made, and so the king can't figure this out. What does that all mean? He says, well, these are the various generations you're going to have, and each one of them is going to be death to you and death to you and death to you, and finally they get wiped out. And the Assyrians, you got the Assyrians, the Medes, the Hittites, the Babylonians, and they all got their own gods and stuff. When the Assyrians, for example, I don't mind getting off a little bit, when the Assyrians came into northern Israel and then all the way down to Jerusalem, when they got to there, they did this. Part of their thing was to get into the culture that they were at. In other words, they weren't there to kill everybody. What they did was they took their women and said, go find some Jewish men, and Jewish men go find some Assyrian women. And so by the time you get all this stuff, now Jesus encounters this, remember, in his account of meeting the woman of Samaria. And when he meets her, she has to go out at noontime because everybody thinks of her as a wanton woman. And so they just disbar her because she does not follow Jewish traits. And she comes in and Jesus says to her, go tell your husband, I said, and Jesus says, you had 5 husbands and you're with a 6th now. Now, if you go to the scriptures, and they will tell you as they moved into Assyria, it says, now with them, they brought their gods. How many do you think they had? See, so she came in as a representative. This is, I think, the gist of what went on with Jesus, is they came in marrying out of their Judaism into these other cultures because they had to, because the other culture dominated. So they had no choice to it. And so that's part of what Jesus is after, was that this woman and then she becomes an apostle herself, because what does she do? She says, let me have that water. He says, well, it says, if you have this water, you will live forever. And so whatever it was, then finally she runs into town and says to everybody out loud at noontime, probably when everybody's out for lunch, and so the crowds are there, and someone says, quite pointedly says, he told me everything I ever did. They said, well, we wanted that ourselves. But what happened was that the Samaritans became a possible place for the rise of Christianity. In fact, you find in the Acts of the Apostles and later that Peter and John are sent to go to Samaria to be missionaries to those. So this woman became a missionary. So anyway, with that, let's continue. So, holy ones, I know your eagerness. What a beautiful language we have here. These are not exaggerations as much as they are dignified statements about the reality. So your eagerness, about which I boast of you to the Macedonians, and then Achaia. Now those areas are just to the north of where we know the famous areas of the Roman kind of retirement place. And also the place where onto the east side of that was the famous place where Lydia was, Philippi. He says that Achaia has been ready since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. In other words, they have already got the message of what Paul wants, because he's found out a way to give love to others is our brethren, I use the masculine, our brethren in Jerusalem, and perhaps other ways on the outlying areas, so that they can be fed and have sustenance. And so I sent my brothers that our boast might not prove empty. You might be ready, for fear that any Macedonians come with me and find you not ready, we may be put to shame, to say nothing of you in this conviction. So he has a little bit of a cider there, which says, I'm glad you did that, because if you didn't, I'm going to be kind of put down quite a bit because of the reaction of people not helping his own. So I thought it necessary to encourage the brothers to go ahead to you and arrange in advance for your promised gift, so that in this way it might be ready as a bountiful gift and not as an exaction, meaning not that we had to force it out of you. Consider this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. See, these are what we find in all the texts as much as possible. Even Jesus uses all over the place, and these are metaphors. What's Jesus' greatest metaphor? Well, let's take John chapter 12. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground, it remains a grain of wheat. But if it falls into the ground, it grows to be a beautiful blossom. So this is a metaphor that we get here. And so I arranged this. So consider what this is in verse 7. Each must do as already determined, without sadness or compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Oh, well, okay. I'm sure you never heard that before. Many a sermon. Moreover, God is able to make every grace abundant for you, so that in all things, always having all you need, you may have an abundance for every good work. This sounds almost like that they are going to be given some kind of extra largesse in terms of economics. There are ways, I know I'm getting off here a little bit and taking this now, but there are levels of interpretation of scripture that come like this. You can go to historical, and get all the facts of what happened in those days. You can get to the economic, which is how did the countries run. You can get to the political, who was in charge of these. The Romans came and were like the first great empire that had a peaceful organization, as compared to some of these other places where, they came in and went in and out and stuff like that, and were mainly vandals. And so that was a major advance. And then you get from there, and then finally you get down to, the social aspect of things. And then you get down to the religious kind of things. So these are ways to kind of read the scriptures. What we're doing is reading from bottom to top, which is we're reading from the religious, and we're going to occasionally get this values in the letters of Paul and in the others of economic success. So let's continue. As it is written, he scatters abroad, he gives to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. There was a movie made many years ago, 20 years ago, about India. We had one of our choir members, by the way, here comes from India, and he has just signed up to go through the years-long program to become a deacon. So he's a wonderful gentleman. We had a couple of us had breakfast with him yesterday. And India has a section to it, which is Catholic. The rest is all Hindu, and they're trying to make Hindu be the paramount total religion that you can have in India. Some people are behind that kind of political move. So what we're getting here is what this kind of righteousness endures forever. And so what happens is that you can actually have a successful economic, social, historical, political growth out of Catholic faith. For many places and many times, that's exactly what does take place. That people depend on their Catholic faith. This will be mentioned in tomorrow's homily at Mass, by the way, because we had the Feast of St. Joseph on Sunday, and then transferred to Monday. And on Wednesday, we're going to make this kind of comparison, that there was a group of nuns out in New Mexico, and they needed to get their nuns up to the choir loft, but they couldn't do it because they're robes. And they couldn't make stairway because it was too narrow. So some guy came along unannounced and asked if he could stay for the night. They had probably a place out there for people to visit. And he was there for a couple of months, and then he left. And, they didn't ever talked to him or heard anything from him. So anyway, they went and opened the door because he had been working in there, and they found a stairway. And the stairway is impossible because there's nothing to hold it up. It's just stairs going in a spiral like this. You've heard this. And so they went in there. Well, it turns out that there was a couple that you'll hear this tomorrow if you come to the mass. There's a couple that got there. They met on St. Joseph's Day by playing a game on the computer. Met each other. The next year they were engaged on that day, and it was St. Joseph's Day. And then on the next day, next year, this happens. They set up for their wedding. The wedding, unfortunately, comes right at this time of the year. And at this time of the year, they're doing like a whole project on renovating the inside of the church. So it was all kind of scrubbed down, and places that going up and down, and all the cement and wood and all that kind of stuff. And he says, "Oh my God!" He says, "Well, I had a wedding once in one of those type of churches up on St. Alphonsus up on the north side, where they had no choice but to have their wedding there. So they had all this wood set up so that they get up to the ceiling. And here they walked in, that was down the aisle." I said, "Well, that's a metaphor, marriage is a lot of work and maybe you won't get the nice walls you want." And maybe, so anyway, well, that's what happened with this couple. They come there, and sure enough, the very day that they, finished, the last piece of rug went in and stuff, was right before their wedding. So, and they had made a novena, of course, to St. Joseph. So anyway, let's go. We're off track. It says, "You're being enriched for," he says, "one who supplies seed to the sower, bread for food, will supply and multiply your seed and increase the harvest of your righteousness." In other words, you won't end up being the poor being fed. "You are being enriched in every way for all generosity, which through us produces thanksgiving to the God." Now notice all generosity there. See, what I've just done is given you a list of the various ways in which you can be generous. I've experienced people who are in each one of these. "For the administration of this public service is not only supplying the needs of the holy ones, but is also overflowing in many acts of thanksgiving to God." And so that's what it is. It's good to have these things. You say, well, we shouldn't be in politics in the good old US of A, but in 2020, they had an election, and the state of Illinois, Republican and Democrat, had a big festival, because they usually have the big celebration after the inauguration. So usually you have kind of the various peoples go, but Illinois was the only one that had its gathering the night before. They had 3,500 people in the hotel there, the same hotel where Reagan had gotten shot. Ooh. Can you imagine that, cooking up food for 3,500 people? Well, anyway, so they had 3,500 people, and you say, well, that's a whole political meeting. But how did they begin it? With a beautiful and wonderful and inspiring prayer. Yes. How do I know that? I was right behind the microphone. The guy said, he says, "Now, how do we introduce you?" I thought they'd have some guy with a hat, and all that, but but they had not that lowly me. So anyway, said, "Tell them I'm the principal of Carmel Catholic High School in Mundelheim." Oh, okay. I'll send my kids there. So anyway, so we have that nowadays. That is not going to happen at various occasions. "The administration of this public service is not only supplying the needs of the holy ones, but is also overflowing in many acts of thanksgiving to God." So in other words, it's a double barrel thing here. You are going to be giving help, and you're going to be the reception of help. Maybe just because you run an honest business, a careful business, have a dedicated business, that you're not messing around with things, that you're doing things in a good way, a generous way, and this is what you get as a result of it. "Through the evidence of this service, you are glorifying God for your obedient confession of the gospel and the generosity of your contribution to them and to all others. While in prayer on your behalf, they long for you." See, in other words, their prayer is for the prayers of the missionaries as well. They are included in the missionaries as well as they are for, begging for food. So we got it. It's over in the basement.
You want me to go over?
Yeah, go ahead. You just have to get in. You have to get somebody to help you get in. Door's locked.
Go for it.
Okay, but you've been in the basement. Not, well, now it can't be told. I live in the basement. Okay. They open the door and leave food. So through the evidence of this service, you are glorifying God for your own obedient confession, while in prayer on your behalf, they long for you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable victory. Spirituality, I put down there. Numerical count is helpful, but the spirituality is profound. See, remember the rich man? He was given what Jesus offered him. He says, I will give you partnership with my mission. That's what he says, come follow me. That what must I do? Come follow me. You must give up everything you have, which is all his largesse. And he says, forget it. So this is these are realistic type things, are they not? Okay, now what we're going to do with the generosity of our table here is actually be passed out, Kathy? Yeah. Okay, so everybody has 9 and 10.
And 11.
And 11, including myself.
I put them on you.
Okay, now I'm going to end my novena to St. Joseph, saying, please give me the pages to the right of my body. Oh, here they are. So let's continue. Now what we get is chapter 10. And this chapter 10 and 11 have this quality to them. We have gone through this so many times, but is boasting and ego, are those equal in merit or demerit? In other words, why would somebody boast? I do it constantly. Oh, well, that's a different story. Because of the fact that that's a way of sharing information, so that we realize that there are, these events, and it might cost you something in terms of your boasting of your own kind of hurt that people think you're just showing off. So let's go here. The accusation of weakness says, now I myself, Paul, urge you through the gentleness and clemency of Christ. See, clemency is interesting because one of the first great writers of Paul, because this is written in Greek, one of the first great is Clement the First, around the year 90 or so, right in there. And he writes a lot about Paul. So we get good information from him about Paul. He kind of picks up where Paul left off. So it's interesting they use the word clemency in this letter, because it means mercy, of course. I who am humble when face to face with you, but brave toward you when absent. Why is that? See, because he wants to be strong in committing himself to them. So he's not going to see, it's just because you're out of my sight and out of my purview, and maybe I'll never see you again. It doesn't mean that I'm not there for you. And so in order to do that, he says, I got to be strong for you, not just kind of like, and also all my friends. Remember when he was going down to Israel, and he is up in the northern part, and he doesn't want to stop off at Ephesus, because if he does, the people there will love him too much. And so what he does is he skips it and he goes around to the bottom, to Miletus. And when he gets there, sure enough, the leaders of Ephesus and all the people of Count come down there. And it's a very touching scene. They hold on to him. They hug his knees. They kiss him. It's all because he's leaving, and he's made it clear he probably won't see them again. And so then he gets on the ship and goes off. So that's what he's talking about here. So we have to kind of read this with some kind of understanding. I'm going to go to verse 2. I beg you that when present, I may not have to be brave with that confidence which I intend to act boldly against some who consider us as acting according to the flesh. Now, flesh, again, I've constantly said, does not reveal the sexual activity. It goes back to the Platonic Aristotelian differential in philosophy. For Plato, you were spirit, and you worked to get to the 4 great qualities of eternity. For Aristotle, you get to be the effect of a cause. So you want to build a table. Okay, you got 4 things you got to do. First of all, you got to have some wood. Secondly, you got to have some tools. Thirdly, you have to have some skill. What's missing? What's missing for the whole thing is the plan. You have to have a plan for the operation. So for Paul, what he's going to do to define us is that we have the body, we have the mechanisms, we have all this, that, the other thing. But what is our plan is how we could translate this. Thomas Aquinas does this in his Summa Theologica. Okay, we continue. For although we are in the flesh, we do not battle according to the flesh, for the weapons of our battle are not of flesh, but enormously powerful, capable of destroying fortresses. See, this again goes under the title of metaphor, that what we're talking about here is not building an army, although the Jews did build armies and fought the Romans 3 times over and lost 3 times over. And so up to the time of Jesus. So what's happening here is he's saying, no, this is a metaphor. The power that you have is way beyond anything that our forces could give you. We destroy arguments and every penetration raising itself against the knowledge of God. Take every thought captive in obedience to Christ. We are ready to punish every disobedience once your obedience is complete. What would be a disobedience? Well, lack of faith, taking up to some pagan ritual or something. Well, then you might be dismissed from the community. We just had that. The Pope just wrote this, rather important for our situation. And that is, he said, you cannot receive communion if you're not part of the community. And the community he means is not, geographical or spatial or you paid your dues or whatever. He's talking about whether or not you are a believer. And in that belief that you have, you give yourself over to Christ. And so that's the same type of thing we're talking about here. That's where he got this idea. We destroy arguments. Says, look at what confronts you. Whoever is confident belonging to Christ should consider that as he belongs to Christ, so do we. And even if I should boast a little too much of our authority, which the Lord gave our building you up and not for tearing you down, I shall not be put to shame. Let me just put that into my visual of this. He's saying, you, Paul, have authority, but your authority does not lead people as much as to inspire people by your leadership. And so this is what he's talking about, is that I have the actual frame within me and beauty within me of God's presence. And so I tell you that is what you have to have. And you say, well, that's balderdash, I'm out of here. Well, then you're going to be dismissed. So Paul's not going to be put to shame because of what he did, which was to show his leadership and inspiration to be equal. He says, may I not seem as one frightening you through matters. For someone will say, his letters are severe and forceful, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible. Whoa. Yeah. So these are not the friends of Paul. So whoever read the letter there said his bodily presence is weak. Well, okay, that can happen. But I shall not be put to shame. See, because of the fact that his speech is contemptible. Here, probably one of the greatest preachers of the 100 preachers of the world. Peter would be another one, and you'd have other ones of the saints, and all those for all the other religions and continents and other people. They all would have some kind of a leader, and these would be spokespeople for that. Such a person must understand that what we are in word through matters when absent, that we are also in action when present. So Paul is saying that there is a connection between us, a bond between us. The millennium of the year 2000, sponsored by the United Nations, was what they call the University of the United Nations. And they picked representatives from each country, 22 of them. And everything was secret, because otherwise people be all over. And so the United States, some people be from India, from Australia, from Africa, and so they'd all come, and they were all given this task: make a list of the things the next millennium should do and get rid of. So everybody, you see what I mean? They had like 20 things that this is what you should do, this is what you should get rid of. And so then they put their document together. Sadly, and you know how full of baloney I am, but this is not baloney. But I was invited to that Egypt. Now in Egypt, through that group. Now in Egypt, they had taken what they thought would be a great image of the millennium, because you can't go to Paris or to China or to France or United States or where are you going to find a single place you could go to that's going to be friendly to everybody? So anyway, so the Egyptians figured, hey, we've been here 5,000 years with these pyramids. So and they had a big bulb on the top, with the bright lights flashing on it. So the thing was going to turn like this, like a big prom. Well, we got the message like at Christmas time the year before, summer before, and they said we're not going to do it. They canceled it, and maybe because they thought that already like 1 million people had signed up for it or something, and they couldn't handle the crowd or whatever. Maybe that's probably, who knows. Jews would be good because they knew how to live in the desert. Okay, now that I said that, I just better move on to more decent things. So anyway, that is interesting to say that the world could be a community. And if you take a look at it now, it'd be like fractured glass. You have shiny elements here, shiny elements there, but broken, bloody glass over here, over there. So anyway, he says, not that we dare to class or compare ourselves, I'm up on the upper right side now, with some of those who recommend themselves. But when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. See, in other words, you don't gain your status in life by saying, I am better than you. You might recognize by saying, the task that I was given, I completed. The daily mass a week ago had the prayer, if you want to call it that, or poem, or sermon of John Henry Newman, a beautiful one, in which he talks about God has created me for some definite purpose. I could quote it for you, but it'll take a time. And it's about a page and a half. But that's what he felt was each one of us in our own individuality has a purpose. And that purpose must find its finitude in exactly how we live our life. And it doesn't come by saying, I'm going to try to be better than somebody else and look down upon somebody else. Did we not hear this recently in perhaps a Sunday sermon about some guy who's saying, have mercy on me, have mercy on me. And another guy saying, I'm glad I'm not like one of those. Yeah, well, there's times when we are one of those. We will not boast beyond measure, but we'll keep to the limits God has apportioned to us. See how thoughtful this is? We have been given a portion of what we can do in human life. And that will be given out, distributed. And when we get ours, because God comes to us individually, when we have those of ours, then what we are ready to do is to move on and say, this is what God intended me to do. I had this just in my own thoughts, I'm going to tell you, kind of thinking about this all last week, saying, how did all this happen? And it was just said, well, you are meant to do this, but you certainly weren't meant to do that. And it's your own choice if you do the lousy. But so anyway, it says, we're not boasting beyond measure in other people's labors, yet our hope is that as your faith increases, our influence among you may be greatly enlarged within our proper limits. See how thoughtful this is. This is a real spiritual psychology, that our psychology is based on understanding of who we are. The basic retreat that people can make is to find out and discover who we are, so that we may preach beyond the gospel and beyond you, not boasting of work already done in another sphere. Whoever boasts should boast in the Lord. There it is, his key. He says, because Paul says this, doesn't he? Everything that I tell you comes to me through me to you. How about the reading we had was it yesterday, where we start off with the talking of someone, and then all of a sudden we're talking about God. God does this. The letter from Hosea. Hosea does something in telling us what God has told him, and he spreads it by telling us. But then he quotes God, or God speaks to him, and this is what God says. Oh my goodness! So this is what those great prophets were. They were like a machinery of exposing God's truth to us. For it's not the one who recommends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord recommends. Wow, are we making sense with all this? Don't you see a common thread through it all? So it's really very positive, is it not? It's not kind of Paul saying, you got to do it my way, the Frank Sinatra bit, and I went to a funeral one time, sadly, and because one of the people didn't like this gentleman, but her son came along, and so she came up to him and says, yeah, he did it his way. Oh, my dear. Here's your keys, go to your car. My goodness. Now we're going to go with preaching without charge. If you would put up with a little foolishness from me, please put up with me. Okay, so Paul's kind of a chummy kind of thing. He says, for I'm jealous of you with the jealousy of God, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. See, another metaphor. We are a chaste virgin to Christ. You know, in other words, we are the one who brings Christ into the world. We have to read this very carefully. How could we possibly, I'm talking from the male side, be a virgin to Christ? And how could you marry people who've had children, say, I am a virgin to Christ? Well, it's very easy to say, because what he's doing is using a metaphor that each one of us, male, female, old, young, productive or not reproductive, but or whatever, because of the fact that we are who we are. And so each one of us takes on like a Marian role. Now, only once does Paul, in all of his letters, which is a good part of the New Testament, mention Mary. And there he only mentions the woman. You know, he doesn't get into a pat on the back about Mary, the mother of Jesus. So so here we get, though, kind of a real interest in this. I think this is based on what Paul has not given to us, and that is something about Mary. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve, okay, your thoughts may be corrupted by a sincere and pure commitment to Christ. Now, I find this to be a kind of a typical thing of Scott Hahn or some of these other modern theologians and writers. They're wonderful books and works because they're understandable. And what they're saying here is, as Eve became the mother of all humankind. Now, by that, I was just talking to somebody the other day about yesterday about DNA, saying yes, each one of us has the same DNA. You got to look for it, that every other human has. That scientists tell us that, so I go along with it. Meaning, in other words, that we come from a common source. So we could say that Eve is the mother of the human race. You say, well, you could have picked somebody else, and God would have said, I'm making action out of this. God would have said, well, I did pick someone else, but they then became someone else through the influence of the devil. So, and so what does that make Mary? Mary becomes the new Eve. That's one of her titles. She becomes mother, here is your son. Son, here is your mother. Now, the word son there is for the blessed, beloved disciple. We're going to talk about that in my notes here today. Beloved disciple is a person who writes the gospel, we think. It's not John the apostle. You say, wait a minute, you got to explain all that. Yeah, I can't in this moment. But the beloved disciple is the one who stands for the rest of humanity. So that's why Jesus calls his mother, both at the time of the wedding feast of Cana and at the time of the cross. He doesn't say Mary. He says mother. Why? Because you are the mother. So this is I hope this is building up some truth in this. Okay. For someone creature, let's continue. I'm afraid that as serpent deceived. Okay, I'm in verse. If someone comes and preaches another Jesus than the one we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it well enough. For I think that I am not in any way inferior to these super apostles. See, in other words, he says, yeah, well, I'll take it in hand, and then for lunch, wrap your sandwich in it, because it's just not worthy of it. It's not worthy of anything meaningful. So he said, but he's not telling go to war on it, but he's just saying get rid of it. He says, even if I am untrained in speaking, I'm not so in knowledge, and in every way we have made this plain to you in all things. Did I make a mistake when I humbled myself so that you might be exalted? Because I preached the gospel to you without charge. Charge meaning, upkeep. What do you think a TV minister brings in? Well, try 10 million a year, try over 100 million a year, and you will be speaking of actual real people. Which explains that this will be the last time I see you, and I'm taking some silverware with me. And okay, I'm just kidding. Says, I like that. He says, even though I'm untrained in speaking, it's almost like he might be aware of his own, limits in speaking that someone else has talked about. He says, don't make a mistake. When I was humbled myself, so you might be exalted because I preached the gospel, I plundered other churches by accepting them in order to minister to you. Paul's really having fun. He says, I plundered. I like that. He says, yeah, I took their sandwiches and I put them in here and I'm going down there. So it says, and when I was with you, you say, what's in a sandwich? Well, I've had these sandwiches because I've lived there for a while. And so you get a nice pita bread, a little pocket at the top, you put in a little bit of lettuce and stuff like that. Some cucumbers are always nice. And then you put in some feta cheese that's in there, and they put in some other type stuff like that. And you put in some kind of ground up grain and stuff like that, make it into a mush, and then you put that in there. Oh, it's delicious. So anyway, so when I was with you and in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my needs. So I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. See, why was Paul talking about this? Because something must have come up where people were saying, yeah, you're coming down here to get money for us, for you. By the truth of Christ in me, this boast of mine shall not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. Why? Because I do not love you. Question. Do I love you? Do I not love you? Well, God knows the answer, and that is, yes, I love you. And what will I do to continue to do in order to end this pretext of those who seek a pretext for being recarded, as we are in the mission of what they boast? For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers who masquerade as apostles of Christ. See, this would be what I was talking about before. We were exchanging before about the thing that we don't know a lot about. I didn't know about it, but I'm going to know about it in about 2 weeks, about all the different pagan, movements that are out there at that time. This was a true story. Some lady wrote up about it, that she was in Mexico of all things, and they had in a town, and she wanted to go to church on Sunday. So she went to one church and saw a sign there, and then she saw across the street was another sign. So she said, well, let's see what that. So she went to about 4 or 5 different churches, just to see what was going on there, and whether they were singing or crying or whatever it was. She wanted to kind of fit in. And so that's what we're talking about here. I'm not saying that they're pagans. I'm just saying that, they've been broken down. And what I do, I will continue to do in order to end this pretext of those who seek a pretext. See, and so these are false apostles, deceitful workers, and I like the language that they use, super apostles, because they make themselves to be super apostles. And the comment that is made by commentators is this: how can you distinguish a phony super apostle who might even do a miracle or something between that and a real apostle? It says all you got to do is to ask the super apostle, have you suffered for your faith? And they will obviously say, no, what are you nuts? I didn't suffer for my faith. I'm here to give the message and for some recompense. Does that make sense to you? Here's Paul, he's practically beaten to a pulp, and he's saying, do you love God? He said, well, I think so. What does Jesus want to show? Doubting Thomas. I hate that word, doubting Thomas. He was not a doubter. He was a lover. He loved Jesus so much he couldn't accept the fact that he had died. And so anyway, well, look at this. See, right there on my hand. Oh, okay. Okay. That doesn't mean anything. So it's not strange that his ministers also masquerade as ministers of righteousness. The end will correspond to their deeds. Ooh. We're going to continue. We're right on time, are we? We still have time? Or are we getting close?
23 minutes.
Left. Yes. Well, I kind of planned this as 22, so we get an extra minute. Oh, man. Well, now Paul's boast, and this is given to us several times here, and also in the Acts of the Apostles. And I think it's very valuable for us because otherwise we think, well, Paul has been given like a bubble of glass around him. He's been protected because he's God's speaker. It's just the opposite. You are going to be punished by being a speaker for God. Our country nowadays is in various ways, and things like that, bringing into laws and other type things, difficulties for faith. Paul's boast, his labors. He says, I repeat, no one should consider me foolish, but if you do, accept me as a fool so that I may boast a little. So Paul is just having some fun here. This is heartfelt. This is not dogmatic, philosophical, theological, whatever. He's just saying, oh yeah, if that's the way you want to think about it. I'm okay. But I'm not saying according to the Lord, but as a foolishness in this boastful state. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast, for you gladly put up with fools, since you are wise yourselves. Or you put up as if someone enslaves you, or devours you, or gets the better of you. See, he's putting on somebody else's mask and being somebody else to saying, yeah, this is what I would do if I was foolish. Devours you, gets the better of you, puts on airs, slaps you in the face. To my shame, I should say, we are too weak. What does anyone dare to boast? Says, I'm speaking in foolishness. I also dare. Are they Hebrews? So am I. And he was. Are they Israelites? So am I. So are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I'm talking like an insane person. I'm still more. With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, far more beatings, and numerous brushes with death. 5 times at the hands of the Jews, I received 40 lashes minus 1. See, their law was you could have 40 lashes, period. And then you had to stop. So they always gave 39 just to be sure. So if you talk to anybody who's been lashed, they only get 39 just in case they miscounted. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I passed a night and a day on the deep, on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own race, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers at sea, dangers among false brothers, in toil and hardship through many sleepless nights. That one I think really caught my attention. Because he must toss and turn, instead of just saying, oh, I had another wonderful, beautiful day. Let's see, I got up, I had some breakfast and then stuff like that. We talked and joked a little bit. We walked quite a bit. I got beat up on the sidelines and thrown into a ditch. Then we had lunch, and then I went on in the afternoon, and then they kicked me around and stuff like that, brought me for tied me up and stuff like that. And then now here I am with my head on a rock, and I'm going to just sleep it off. I don't think so. Through hunger and thirst, through frequent fastings, through cold and exposure. And apart from these things, there is daily pressures upon me of my anxiety for all the churches. That he finally said it. This is the heart of Paul, that this is what brings out his strength as a human being, is the anxiety he has for all the people that he preached and for all those he has not yet preached to, who is led to sin, and I am not indignant. Paul's boast, his weakness. If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus knows he was blessed forever, that I do not lie. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas guarded the city of Damascus in order to seize me, but I was lowered in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. How's that for the introduction of Paul to his ministry? First he's knocked over, then he's landed, then he doesn't eat. Then they bring him in, straighten him up, give him some clothes. He finds out that they want to arrest him and probably execute him as a foreigner. And so they let him down through the wall, and he goes off into the desert. Thank you, Jesus. He, I'm sure, was grateful for this. It proved the point that he was the one that God meant to send to us. Somebody could handle all of that and not be a broken person. So now we have one lesson less. Is that correct? Next week? After this? Yes or no?
Next week.
Oh, we have 2. Yes. I'm sorry.
Next week.
Oh, yes. Okay. That's good. Now, yes. Let me explain this. I have a little gift for you today. Over the course of my writings and things like that 5 times I wrote something about this strange figure in the Gospel of John called the beloved disciple, because we are convinced, as even the popes are, that John was at the cross and John was at the so anyway. So these are 5 essays. They're not written all at once. They were written over a period of time. And I found one of the other day because I was looking for it, and then found out that I had others on the same thing on the computer, so I printed them. So you have 6 pages with 5 titles. So let me just, this will be a little bit confusing for you, so, but stick with it. And oh, by the way, it's not part of our program. It's just a gift. Because I figured we'd have about 5-7 minutes left, right?
Mhm.
Still on Zoom. So you're still on Zoom. You're still on Zoom.
I am.
Yeah, do you want me to stop the Zoom?
Yeah, but they don't have a page.
Okay, we're gonna
We can
stop
make it
the,
available in the office.
we're gonna stop the recording right now. There's a handout that's available if you want to pick it up in the office anytime you're in the parish. So thank you for the time together and have a good rest of your day.
Now there's 5